Hello, my name is Laura Boone and welcome to a romantic rendezvous locked down session with Maya Linnell, who is going to do a reading for us. Welcome, Maya.
Thank you, Laura. It's lovely to be here today.
Now, before Maya gets started, I'll just give you an overview of her career to date. Maya is a writer, a baker, and a woman with a green thumb. Those three words sum up her life. You can add best-selling author, proud mother, lifelong bookworm, sewer, recovering owner builder, DIY junkie, and animal hoarder to the list. But when she has free time and she is not off adventuring with her family, writing, baking, and gardening are the three things that make her smile. Some fun facts about Maya. Her lucky number is 3. Her name is pronounced Maya. She has sneaky blocks of chocolate hidden all across the house. She always has a book or 3 on the go. Her lifelong dream to become an author came true last winter, and she couldn't wish for a better job than telling the stories of rural Australia. She loves baking, especially the sweet stuff, gardening, particularly dahlias, sewing, skirts, aprons, and bags, and writing rural romance. And she'd rather buy rose bushes or fabric any day than new clothes and shoes. Her most recent release is Bottlebrush Creek, and I'll hand over to Maya now, and she can tell you about the book and read a little bit from it for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura, for the warm welcome, and a big thank you to everyone from the Australian Romance Readers Association. I've been very thrilled to be a member of this lovely organisation for a bit over a year now, and I've really loved reading the different blogs that come up, and I was absolutely delighted that you lovely people nominated Wildflower Ridge, my first novel from last year, was shortlisted for the favourite Australian romance author, the favourite debut romance author, and the favourite small town romance in the awards last year. So a huge thank you to everyone who cast a vote. It was an amazing, very thrilling for a debut author. So as Laura said, I've recently released my second rural romance with Alan and Unwin. So each of my stories focuses on one of the different McIntyre sisters. So I have 4 sisters. The first story, Wildflower Ridge, focused on Penny McIntyre, who came back to the farm after living in the city. And the second book, Bottlebrush Creek, focuses on Angie McIntyre. Now, she's the youngest of the McIntyre sisters, and she decides that her and her partner need a project to bring them together. They have a very young daughter.
Maya, I'm just going to interrupt you a minute. I could be wrong about this, but do you just want to check? I think you might have something in your teeth.
Oh, it's probably the gap. Is it the gap? Just there?
Yes. Okay. Sorry if it's just the gap,
No.
but I was torn, and I thought I just don't want to make you go through the whole thing and then say to me afterwards, why didn't you say anything?
Oh, thank you so much. No, see, that was my impatience because we were getting married and I had braces on, and I'd said to the orthodontist, this is the date they need to come off, and he said no, they need to stay, and I said, well, that's too late, we've got a wedding booked. Love to have closed up that gap, but
okay, all right, I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
Thank you.
Obviously the image is better or worse depending on which way you want to look at it on my iPad and my laptop, and that's what happened. But we'll just get Di to cut all that out, so if you just want to take a few steps back and keep going, and then we'll keep going.
Yep, beautiful. So my second book, Bottlebrush Creek, came out recently. It's another rural romance. It focuses on the youngest McIntyre sister, Angie. Now, Angie is a beautician. She has a 2-year-old daughter called Claudia. Her partner, Rob, is a fly-in, fly-out worker. He works FIFO in a mine site in Western Australia. And she thinks what they need as the perfect little project to bring their little family together is to take on a renovation. So I'm not sure if any of you have been through a renovation or not. I have done a renovation and also a huge big owner builder project. So I thought that'd be the perfect little conflict to give to my main characters in the story. So what you'll find out is it doesn't all go quite to plan as Angie expects. So I'm going to read you a couple of chapters, and hopefully it gives you a little bit of a taste of the story inside. Chapter 1. Angie McIntyre dusted her hands on the polka-dotted apron, opened the oven and groaned. Instead of a gush of hot air that normally sent her curls into ringlets, it was cold in the dark and silent cavity. Not again. She twisted the temperamental temperature dial left and right, but no matter how hard she willed it to work, the oven didn't so much as hum. Angie slammed the door shut and surveyed the mess in front of her. Clearing the bench full of ingredients would be easy enough, but the cake would be ruined if she didn't get it into a hot oven soon. The sound of her mobile ringtone cut through the quiet kitchen. As she hunted for it, on the bench top, a pile of magazines slipped to the ground. The glossy pics of grand kitchens and elaborate bathrooms fanned out across the floor, mocking the cramped space. A cold breeze followed Angie down the corridor as she went in search of her phone. No amount of gap filler had yet fixed the endless drafts in the 60s brick veneer, and pigs would fly before the landlord would make good on his promises to bring their rental into the 21st century. Two little feet poked out from beneath the king-size bed. Angie could hear snatches of conversation. Claudia Isabel Jones, do you have mummy's phone? Claudia's pink socks retreated, replaced quickly by a shock of blonde curls and the cheekiest grin this side of the South Australian border. Angie raised her eyebrows. The little girl handed over the phone, adding a handful of fluff-covered sultanas into Angie's outstretched palm for good measure, and then ran down the hallway in a blur of sequins to escape a scolding. Rob? Hey, Ange, wondering how long it'd be till you realised she'd pinched your phone? She gets that from you, sassy thing, said Angie. Fat chance of cheekiness being allowed in the Jones family. It must be the McIntyre in her, he laughed. So, fancy a drive this arvo? A drive, said Angie. You'll have been travelling since 4 a.m. What happened to our quiet night in when you got home? Angie frowned. Her chances of pulling off this impromptu birthday party were getting slimmer by the minute. Rob laughed again. Thought you'd like a surprise, so get the ready, home. His voice faded in and out before the reception failed altogether. Rob, hello? Angie stared at the beeping phone. I'm the one planning the surprise around here. Back in the kitchen, she twisted the oven dial one last time. Still nothing. She hated the idea of letting Rob's birthday pass without a homemade cake and racked her brains for plan B. Come on, Claude, let's go next door and ask if we can borrow their oven again. Then it's tidying up time. With the brimming cake tin in one hand and Claudia's little fingers in the other, she glanced around the cramped rental. It was barely big enough for a couple, let alone a family. But if she gave the place a quick tidy while the cake baked and popped a few candles on, they'd have everything they needed to celebrate Rob's birthday. The landscape of Western Victoria whipped past the windscreen in a green blur. Freshly shorn sheep dotted the paddocks, their bright white wool catching the sunlight like coconut on a lamington, but Angie couldn't drag her eyes away from Rob Jones. He'd barely stopped to take a breath since he pulled into the driveway, dumped his backpack on the porch and whisked them outside and pointed the car towards the coast. There's enough land at this place to crop and run cattle. The bones of the cottage are sound. Owners upgraded the wiring a few years ago, so it's not a death trap like all the other houses we've looked at, said Rob. It's a dead set winner. Angie couldn't help laughing. You've said that about every old place we've seen so far. Remember the last time you were home? That dive in Macarthur? The real estate guy had to catch the front door when it fell off its hinges. And the floorboards in that renovator's delight in Allensford, it had more termites than timber. Angie smoothed the newspaper clipping in her lap. Rob had waved it around like a winning lottery ticket when he'd arrived home. With 4 bedrooms, 2 living areas and acreage, there'd be ample room, but by the look of the photograph, there was a lot of hard yakka involved. They've used the phrase fixer-upper twice, and that is code for downright awful, said Angie. Rob took his large hand off the steering wheel to squeeze her knee. Wouldn't stay that way for long with the 2 of us on site, he said. Small country towns blurred into one another as Rob took them down unfamiliar back roads and single-lane tracks. The ocean glimmered in the distance, and after 2 hours driving, they finally arrived in front of the weatherboard cottage. "Perfect or what?" said Rob. Angie felt a surge of excitement as she studied the building. It was even more derelict in the bright spring sunshine than the photograph had suggested, but the ornate latticework and wide veranda offered it an air of elegance. Even in its state of disrepair, she could see the cottage had once been someone's pride and joy. She looked back at the advertisement, feeling the need to balance Rob's excitement. She was normally the one who rushed into things, yet Rob looked like he was about to whip out his wallet and lay down a deposit as soon as she gave him the nod. "Better than others we've seen," she said cautiously. "It's probably miles outside our price range though." Rob tapped his nose as he unbuckled Claudia from the back seat. Motivated seller, apparently. He grabbed Angie's hand, almost dragging her down the driveway. The smell of wisteria and jasmine wafted up from the neglected garden. Overgrown rose tendrils snagged Angie's jeans as she followed the path to the house. The newspaper photograph must have been taken years before, or strategically cropped so that the wild garden beds and piles of rubbish at the side of the yard were out of shot. The lawns had been given free rein, growing knee-high and creeping up onto the path around the cottage. Even so, just as she'd been drawn to the ad, Angie found herself gravitating towards the old building. "Here's the agent now," said Rob. Angie stuck out her hand, but the real estate agent leaned in to kiss her on the cheek before slapping Rob on the back. "Good to see you, Jonesy. And Angie, I've heard so much about you and this little cutie." He tweaked Claudia's nose. "What a great opportunity, hey?" Angie lifted an eyebrow as the man shoved a key into the front door. Friendliest real estate agent she'd ever met. Rob took her hand and they slipped inside. They went from room to room. The high ceilings and generous windows made the cottage feel spacious. And even with furniture, there'd be oodles of room for hide and seek, plus enough floor space for the puzzles the oversized jigsaw puzzles Claudia loved, and maybe 2 sofas instead of the 2-seater they'd had to make do with in Eden Creek. Sunshine streamed in through the dirty windows and dust motes danced. Angie swooned when she saw the ornate ceiling roses in the lounge room and more in the smaller bedroom, which would be perfect for Claudia. The real estate agent noticed Rob admiring the open fireplace and launched into his sales pitch. Winters snuggled up in front of the wood fire, summers at the beach down the end of the lane. What more could you want? There's even a creek at the back of the property if you fancy some eel trapping, he said. Angie almost caught herself nodding and strode out of the room. The floral carpets in the bedrooms would need to go, and most of the bathroom fittings and cabinetry. Angie tried to remain impartial, willing herself to find fault with the pressed tin kitchen ceiling, the cracked foot-high skirting boards, and the worn floorboards. But after half an hour inside, the cottage had an undeniable hold on her. The features she loved steadily outweighed the cons. She could picture them here as a family. It felt like they'd found their new home. Angie buckled a tired Claudia into the car seat, watching her daughter's eyelids flutter closed. She joined Rob and the real estate agent in a surreal conversation about timelines and deposit options, unable to believe that they may finally have found their dream cottage. Enough land to run a few cattle, close to the ocean, with a little orchard, room to plant a weeping cherry tree in memory of her mum, Annabelle. The perfect place to turn Claudia into a little green thumb and maybe, one day, expand their little family. Coo! Angie swiveled towards the familiar voice. No, it can't be. Yoo-hoo! Is that the birthday boy and his beautiful girls? It wasn't until Angie spotted Rosa Jones striding across the paddock that she noticed the black and white Frisian cows and the thick bottlebrush hedges that camouflaged the neighbouring property. She flashed Rob a look of disbelief and sucked in a sharp breath. What is his mother doing here? Angie barely had time to comprehend the situation before she was squeezed into a vice-like hug, complete with back pats, murmurs of delight, and the scent of roses. Oh, Angie, isn't this great? I've barely slept a wink, said Rosa. Okay, how did Rosa know about this before me? The real estate agent drove off with a toot and a wave. Rob strode over to his mum, his tall frame dwarfing Rosa as she gave him a tight squeeze. They shared the same black wavy hair and olive skin, but Rob had definitely inherited his father's height. "What did you think? And where's my beautiful granddaughter?" "Mum, she's asleep." Rosie yanked the back door open. A sharp cry escaped from the car. Angie and Rob both grimaced. "Oops, Granny woke you. Let's get you out of that seat, Poppet." Rosa fumbled with the 5-point harness. "I've got some beautiful new calves to show you." Claudia shook her head mutinously. Angie knew exactly how she felt. "Here, Mum, let me." Rob squeezed in and lifted Claudia out of the car. Rosa stepped in closer. "Granny's missed you, Poppet, and haven't you grown tall?" Standing on tiptoe, Angie whispered to Rob, "It's within walking distance of the dairy. How could you not mention that?" "Would you have come?" Rob asked. Angie groaned, now spying the Joneses' dairy and farmhouse further down the road. Of all the fixer-uppers in the country, had she really just fallen in love with the one right next door to his folks? Chapter 2. Rob watched Angie's face for a sign, hoping she wasn't going to discard the entire prospect on the basis of the neighbours. "Don't write it off just yet," he whispered, landing a kiss on Angie's cheek. Keeping their arrival time a secret from his mother and driving in the back way clearly hadn't helped one bit. Rosa had probably been watching Enderby Lane all afternoon. "I couldn't help hearing voices while I was out pruning my David Austins. You're coming round for dinner, aren't you?" Rosa said. Rob waited for Angie's response. He'd thrashed the pants off her in enough games of strip poker to know she was wearing her polite smile, not her "what a fabulous idea" smile. When Rob said the property was by the coast, "I didn't realise it was quite so close to your house. We've got plans tonight, that's all," said Angie apologetically. Rob put an arm around Rose's tiny shoulders to soften the blow, but her face still plummeted. "Oh, right then, of course. I'll just pop your present in the post then, and the chickens will be happy with a bit of sponge cake tomorrow." Rob shot Angie an appeasing look. She knew as well as he did that their visits were few and far between, even though they only lived 200 kilometres apart. It didn't seem to worry his father, but barely a week passed without his mum inviting him around or reminding him she was free to babysit whenever they needed. Making excuses was always easier over the phone, or when he was working 4,000 kilometres away at the mine. "Maybe just a quick piece of cake before we hit the road, Ange? Our quiet night can handle a little delay, right?" He knew the cake, as much as the occasion, tipped the scales in his favour. Angie couldn't bear to see food going to waste, especially something that had been baked with love. "A cuppa would be lovely, Rosa," said Angie. Less than 2 minutes later, they were standing in his parents' kitchen. As always, the garden was in immaculate condition, from the golf club quality lawns to the hot pink roses lining the dairy walls. Rosa's nod to aesthetics in an otherwise industrial part of the property. Rosa nestled a tea cosy over the teapot and wiped her hands on her neatly pressed slacks. "So, what do you think?" Her voice was hopeful. "Might be hard to imagine, Angie, but that cottage used to be the prettiest little thing. Yellow weatherboards instead of that faded mess. A snazzy burgundy roof without a hint of rust, and heritage green lattice work. Ivan and Ida took such great pride in it." "It's certainly something to think about," said Angie, taking another forkful of sponge cake. "Needs a lot of work, but it's got..." She paused as Rosa's voice cut in over the top. "Good bones, hasn't it? Good bones. Wouldn't take much to bring it up to scratch," said Rosa. Angie speared Rob with another look. He didn't need words to know what she was thinking. "Here for 5 minutes and your mum's already finishing my sentences." Angie's earlier excitement had waned significantly since Rosa's appearance. Now Rob felt his own enthusiasm droop as a familiar maroon farm ute pulled into the driveway, metallic paint gleaming like it had just been washed. John Jones unclipped his dogs from the ute tray before pulling a comb from his back pocket, running it through his thin grey hair and walking into the house. Rob returned his father's brief nod. His father's nods and handshakes were the opposite of his mother's bone-crunching embraces. Rosa crossed the room and pecked her husband's clean-shaven cheek. "Look how big this sweetheart is," she said, patting Claudia's shoulder. John raised a heavy eyebrow. "Now, which one are you again? Kathleen? Kim?" He made it sound like he had dozens of grandchildren instead of just one. Claudia stuck out her little chin and fixed John with an indignant look. I'm Claudia. John's lips twitched. Really? You any good at feeding calves? Claudia pondered the question, polished off her biscuit and climbed out from her stool. She reached for Rob's hand, pulling him towards the back door. Come on, Daddy. Rob hesitated. You go with Pop, Claude. I'll be there in a minute, okay? Much to Rob's surprise, Claudia slipped her tiny hand into her grandfather's. John turned to his wife. Almost time to get the girls in too, Rosa. Can't spend all afternoon chin-wagging when there's cows to milk. They'll keep a few more minutes, said Rosa, putting a cup of tea into Angie's hands and pushing a present towards Rob. Rob glanced at the framed family portrait on the sideboard as he unwrapped his gift. In the photograph, Rosa's smile was extra wide, as if to compensate for her twin sons and reserved husband. Rob and his brother Max had both been a head taller than Rosa by that stage, with a smattering of teenage acne and the bulge of braces behind closed lips. Rose had bemoaned their grim expressions when she'd collected the enlargement from the photographer, even though she couldn't have known it would be the last picture they'd all willingly posed for together. Rob wondered if Max was unwrapping a hand-knitted jumper at this very moment too, or if anyone had baked him a cake. Not that I care, he thought. Rosa's voice jerked Rob back to the present. We hope you buy the cottage. We'd sure love to have you closer, wouldn't we, John? Rosa called. John helped Claudia into a pair of old gumboots. Rob looked away. He didn't need a visual of his father's hesitation as well. Be a good buy for the right person. A house isn't like those motorbikes you've got cluttering up the hay shed, Rob. You can't just stop and start as you please. It'd be fine for someone who's prepared to put in the hard yards, said John. Unlike me, right? The words were out of Rob's mouth in a flash. Enough, commanded Rosa, heaping a huge slice of cake into a takeaway container and sliding it across the bench towards Angie. Not another word was shared between the two men, but a seed of determination sprouted as, through the window, Rob watched Claudia and his father walk to the calf sheds. I'll show you, Dad. This might be the perfect opportunity to finally prove myself. Angie's mind chopped and changed with every kilometre between the coast and Eden Creek. How could I even consider living so close to his parents? But how could we let that cottage slip between our fingers? Rob interjected occasionally, but she batted his questions right back at him, still miffed. It's quite the fixer-upper, isn't it? Just a stone's throw from the beach, said Rob. And spitting distance from your parents. How long were you planning to wait until you delivered that bombshell? Angie closed her eyes, picturing the wonky bullnose veranda, the pitched roof, and the old bubbled glass. New veranda posts, fresh tin, and double glazed windows were an easier fix than the issues they'd face if they moved next door to the Joneses. What do we do for work? She said. You've only got one shift left until the mine scales back its operations. My retrenchment payout from the mine should cover the deposit, and I've looked into renewing my building licence, said Rob, working as a sole trader. You've talked about selling the beauty salon for ages, Ange. Maybe now's the time to put it on the market. If it sells, you could be home with Claude like you wanted. There's enough work at the cottage to keep you busy. Angie huffed. Why does he always have such good comebacks, she thought. That cypress hedge would need to come out. She knew she was clutching at straws now. Yeah, it blocks a fair bit of sunlight, said Rob, although it is handy shelter against a howling southeasterly. But if that's what it takes, I'll sharpen my chainsaw tomorrow. Angie's mind whirled. She thought of the brick path that led to the backyard and her joy at discovering a mulberry tree in the middle of the overgrown lawn. It had dozens of gnarled branches forking off its wide trunk, with hundreds of white flowers adorning the smaller limbs, reminding her of childhood mulberry wars at McIntyre Park. It had been the stuff of dreams and the stuff of her parents' nightmares when they'd arrived home covered in sticky purple mulberry juice. And what will Claudia do while we're busy building? I don't want her to suffer if we embark on this crazy journey, said Angie. She'll be there with us, Ange, learning to count with boxes of screws and tubes of silicone. As well as fussing with dolls and Duplo box, she'll be playing with set squares and hammering nails into timber offcuts. It'll be good for her, I promise, and good for us. And Claudia's soft snores filtered in from the back seat. Angie thought about it. Maybe a project like that was exactly what they needed to bring them together. They'd been like ships passing in the night for most of their relationship. Angie had worked throughout her pregnancy and returned to running the Eden Creek beauty salon when Claudia was 6 months old, while Rob worked fly in, fly out. It hadn't been her dream scenario, but the salon and her clients had been the one constant throughout her adult life. Maybe this cottage could be the catalyst for change, she thought. A chance to turn us into a real family, one that pitches in to get the job done. A family like the one I grew up in. She reached across the gear stick and took Rob's hand, ignoring the voice in her mind that questioned her sanity. You know I'm not a builder, right? Rob raised an eyebrow and waited. She could have sworn he was holding his breath. If it wasn't for the location, said Angie, it'd be perfect. Let me think about it for a few days. So there you go. That is the first 2 chapters of Bottlebrush Creek. So I hope that got your interest and whet your appetite. It's as I said earlier, it's a rural romance. It's all about country living. It's about farming women. It's about equality of women in the workplace. We've got troublesome tradies. We've got cute calves. We've got all sorts of fantastic things and dahlias and baking, because they're some of my favourite things. So I love weaving them into the book. We've also got a little motorcycle theme, which kind of plays on my dad's love of motorbikes. And he was pretty tickled pink to be able to proofread the sections with the vintage motorbikes in there, because Rob is a collector as well. Another little dilemma for Angie to have to deal with later in the story. So I'd love to hear from you guys. If you'd like to hang out with me and learn out more about writing my baking, gardening, country life, I've got a website, and that's may@linnell.com. I send out a newsletter once a month at the start of the month. So that's got all the behind the scenes information about what goes on in my office, lovely pictures of my desk and our lambs, our chickens, the cat, the dog, the cows, sometimes the pigs. So I'd love to have you join in, and thank you very much to everyone for making me so welcome for the Romance Readers. Thank you, Laura, for hosting.
Thank you so much, Maya. That was a wonderful reading. Can I ask you just to hold up for our audience your treasure hunt code?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
No worries.
And have a wonderful rest of the day, and we'll chat again soon.
Thank you, Laura. Stay warm, stay safe.